Okay, the next section is called Embracing the Unconscious. These are the different levels of active imagination. Most of the approaches to active imagination are keyed to coming to terms with the unconscious by bringing the images up to the surface, reducing the negative effects of their autonomous power, making them conscious, and making peace with them. We have already touched on several such approaches. The principal ones are emptying the ego mind and dialoguing with the unconscious contents that spontaneously appear, extending dreams by active imagination, dialoguing with dream figures in imagination, converting fantasy into imagination, personifying moods, feelings, and belief systems, and living through mythical journeys in active imagination. In this section, I will focus on two other excellent purposes that may be served within the second level of active imagination. I call the first one going around the walls of Jericho. The second is living the unlived life. The walls of Jericho. The principle behind the approach I call the walls of Jericho is spelled out symbolically in this ancient story. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given unto thine hand Jericho, and you shall compass the city, all your men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shall you do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. This story refers to an event that must have taken place between 1500 and 2000 years before Christ, and was at first handed down by oral tradition. If we look at it on a symbolic level, it contains a wonderful archetypal principle, a way of approaching the seemingly impossible conflicts within ourselves. The seemingly impossible conflicts within ourselves. I literally just read that. My bad. It contains a wonderful archetypal principle, which is a way of approaching the seemingly impossible conflicts within ourselves. Now it's 3 times the term. The last one was on purpose though. In this remarkable legend, the people came up against a barrier that was absolutely impregnable. It had walls that could not have been breached or scaled by any technology then available to the tribe. But they had a prescription. They had to do a simple ritual. Every day of marching around the walls of Jericho, they made no direct attack, for none could have been successful. Finally, after an accumulation of these ritual marches, pealings of trumpets and shoutings, something happened. The walls fell down flat. Our inner lives often feel like journeys from one Jericho to another. We are continually coming up against obstacles within ourselves that seem like fortresses defended with impregnable walls. Sometimes we call them autonomous complexes, because they are complexes that are completely outside the influence or knowledge of the conscious mind. We only know about them through the havoc they wreak in our lives and emotions. Most of us experience conflicts at some time in life that tear us apart, that seem insoluble. We can't find a path to proceed on, a place to stand, an approach that might bring a resolution. An inner problem that looks so difficult that one doesn't know where to start is an example of an inner Jericho. It is like a walled city within the unconscious. Sorry, I was checking to see if it was still recording. This is pretty cool. So the seemingly insurmountable conflicts that well up within us that we can't even seem to find a way to attack, it's saying that there is some sort of way to go about them, and this section is going to talk about the inner Jericho that's symbolic to the story. So let me start this paragraph again. An inner problem that looks so difficult that one doesn't know where to start is an example of an inner Jericho. It is like a walled city within the unconscious, a blank spot where the conscious mind cannot penetrate, something one can't even understand, much less deal with. It may be that you are hopelessly in love with someone who simply isn't available to you. Tell me about it. Or it may be that you have a habit or a pattern that you can't break, that keeps sabotaging your health, work, or relationships. The problem is within us, but we can't understand it, can't get a handle on it, can't find any direct way to approach it. In these situations, the story of the walls of Jericho is a symbolic prescription for a psychological process. Identify to yourself as best you can what the conflict is, what the focus of your inquiry is, then go around that autonomous complex, looking at it from every angle, pouring psychological energy into it by ritual inner work, circling it like the Jericho of the story until finally the walls tumble down. The walk around Jericho can take any form, so long as you focus your energy on the walled inner city and do your ritual. Personify the conflict by bringing up the images in your mind and talking to them. Invite the people out of the city and find out who they are and why they are opposing you. Active imagination is particularly helpful for this technique of circling the walls of Jericho, but the technique is really a synthesis. The idea is to bring every form of inner work, every method in your repertoire into play. One uses every technique possible that will give some leverage, that will focus energy on the autonomous complex. One keeps it up until finally the barrier between the complex and the conscious mind is penetrated. We pull the fantasies out of the mind to deal with this problem and analyze them as symbols of what is going on deep inside. If a dream pertains, do dream work. Then extend the dream into active imagination and see where it leads. Let us say, for example, that you find yourself in a mood of depression that has beset you for days. You can't understand it, don't know where it came from, and find yourself taking it out on innocent people around you. This depression is your inner Jericho. How do you approach it? First, personify the depression. Go into your imagination and look for the figure, the image that will represent your depression. Now begin your march around the walls of Jericho. Talk to your depression. March around your depression and view it from every side. Talk to the figures who come up in active imagination and find out what they can tell you about the depression. What is it? Where did it come from? Usually a depression is balancing an inflation. But what inflation is it balancing? What do they know about it? Perhaps one of them will admit to being the one inside you who is depressed and can tell you in some detail what he or she is depressed about. In addition to doing active imagination, we pay attention to fantasies and dreams. We write down every dream image, every fantasy image, every idea that comes into our head that seems to relate to this inner Jericho. Above all, we keep going to the inner characters day by day and talking with them. Pour out your feelings. Ask for information. Ask for guidance. Offer to sacrifice the inflation, pretension, or otherworldly ideal that is compensated by the depression. Like Joshua in the legend, go around the inner walls every day. One day, do active imagination. Perhaps nothing dramatic will result that day, but you have done your ritual circumambulation. You have invested your conscious energy in the complex. The key is to invest some energy in small doses on a regular basis towards the inner problem instead of just ignoring it or allowing the other side that's dominating to fester and kind of take the lead. So it's like Wallace Waddles, every day do all that you can do, to the best that you can do it. It's the same concept here, just approaching it in small doses, just giving some attention to it on a regular basis. The next morning, you may have a dream. Since you are putting so much energy into the inner Jericho, you can assume that the dream is probably on this subject. So that day, your walk around the walls of Jericho consists of dream work. Perhaps the dream will give a startling idea of what this Jericho really is. Each day, in one form or another, keep going around the walls of this autonomous complex. Eventually the walls will come down and you will begin to see what is there and what is to be done about it. The principle at work here is one of cumulative energy. One keeps investing energy, pouring the energy of consciousness into this inner complex until finally it has to break. The Gordian knot falls apart. The seemingly impregnable walls fall down. The complex finally becomes penetrable by consciousness. One walks into the walled city and finds out what part of oneself lives there and why it has declared war. One requirement for this miraculous process is that we not expect instant results. Sometimes results do come amazingly quickly, but remember that you are dealing with parts of yourself that have been sealed off completely, absolutely impervious to consciousness, perhaps for years. We have to give this process time and stick with it. That's what I'm trying to do. Give the process time and stick with it, without expecting results instantly or even any at all, but just being there. In the old biblical story, God instructed Joshua to march around the walls for a full 7 days. 7 symbolizes a complete cycle of inner time, the inner time required for a complete evolution of consciousness. Your experience of Jericho will require 7 inner units of time, whatever time is required for you to open up genuine consciousness of your Jericho. Outwardly, it could be 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months, or 7 years. One thing is certain, if you make a start and do your daily march around the walls, you will find a resolution in the end. You don't have to suffer passively. You can do something. You can enlist the help of your inner strengths and you can begin to march. Miraculously, all you have to do is march. You just have to invest the energy, do the ritual, and the results come. No matter how stupid you feel, no matter how weak or incompetent you are in the face of this inner complex, you march and you march and you march, and then the walls fall. It usually happens more quickly than you expect. I've seen people begin this highly concentrated technique with heroic courage, determined to struggle for 20 years if necessary to overcome this insoluble problem and see it resolved in only 3 or 4 days of intense effort. But other Jerichos may be more difficult. They are the ones embedded in the very deep places of the unconscious. They are, in a sense, life problems that stay with us for many years and are actually necessary for our growth. They make us suffer, but they give us our maturity and our individuality in return. For these life problems, the circling of the walls of Jericho is an exact prescription. If you personify the thing in your life that most afflicts you, make it your Jericho and march around that Jericho in your active imagination, you will evolve your problem into a source of consciousness and growth. You will learn that some of our problems and obstacles are our truest friends. Our wounds turn out to be the source of our healing. And that is so absolutely true. So the next section is called Living the Unlived Life. Let me see on time. I think I'm going to stop this again. Please bear with me. There's going to be a few videos for this last chapter, but so far so good. And I just don't want it to cut off while I'm in the middle of it because I know that can be frustrating. Alrighty, I'll be right back.